Welcome to the deep dive. We look at these huge figures, people who really define generations, and, well, we try to understand what really drove them. And today, it's John Lennon. A life just full of brilliant contradictions, immense power. I mean, you think about it. The class clown from Liverpool, the first Beatle, right? But then he somehow becomes this global peace activist, a writer, an artist, and simultaneously a political target, fighting deportation, all while dealing with some really deep personal stuff. It's quite a mix.
It really is. And that's the challenge, isn't it? Trying to square all those different personas. Yeah. The amount written about Lennon is just staggering, but our mission here is to kind of pull it all together, synthesize it. We want to track his evolution, from that kid who didn't conform, the one whose teachers said his energy was misplaced,
right,
through Beatlemania, then into that really political phase in the early 70s, and finally the quiet, almost domestic artist at the end. So we'll tackle it chronologically, but also thematically, looking for those points where the personal really explodes into the public, into his art and politics.
And just for context, we are talking about John Winston Lennon, born 1940, founder, co-lead singer, rhythm guitarist of the Beatles, and that songwriting partnership with Paul McCartney. I mean, it's still the most successful in history. Nothing's really touched it. But yeah, to get the activist, the artist, you have to start with the boy. Those early years, those troubled foundations, they cast such a long shadow.
Oh, absolutely. The turbulence starts right away almost. Born in Liverpool, named after his granddad, John Jack Lennon, and also, interestingly, Winston Churchill. His dad, Alfred, was a merchant seaman, away a lot. And then the money just stopped when Alfred went AWOL in '44. So John initially lived with his mother, Julia, but she eventually passed him over to her older sister, Mimi Smith, to raise.
Which leads to that really famous, almost legendary custody incident in July '46. John's only 5. Alfred takes him to Blackpool. The story goes he was planning to secretly take him to New Zealand. Julia finds them, and in the most common version of the story, Alfred makes little John choose between them, right there.
It's incredibly dramatic.
He supposedly picks his dad twice, but then Julia starts to walk away, and he just runs after her crying. So she takes him home.
It's such a potent image of childhood trauma, isn't it? But we should probably mention there are conflicting accounts. Some sources suggest it wasn't quite that theatrical, maybe more of a mutual agreement that Julia should take him. A witness, Billy Hall, apparently called that whole forced choice story inaccurate. But, whatever the exact detail.
Instability was real.
Exactly. The core instability was absolutely real. He barely saw his father again for almost 20 years.
So he ends up at Mendip's 251 Menlove Avenue with Aunt Mimi and Uncle George. And this is where you see that split develop, right? Mimi's the strict one, trying to instill discipline. But his mom, Julia, she's still around visiting. She's this disruptive, exciting, maybe more artistic influence. She teaches him banjo chords, plays him early Elvis records, the stuff that really lit the fire.
Yeah, that contrast, that pull between Mimi's structure and Julia's sort of bohemian freedom, it really defines his youth. But then the ultimate trauma hits in 1958. Julia is struck and killed by a car driven by an off-duty policeman. John's only 17, and the sources are unanimous on this. It absolutely shattered him. For about 2 years after that, it was just chaos.
How did that manifest?
Heavy drinking, lots of fights. Biographers talk about this blind rage, this profound sense of abandonment. You hear it later raw in songs like Julia and especially Mother. That pain fueled so much.
And it fed directly into that nonconformist identity he already had, didn't it? Even before Julia died, his teachers at Quarry Bank High School pegged him as a troublemaker. They said his energy was often misplaced, that he seemed happy to just sort of drift, even though he was clearly bright.
And this is where it gets interesting, connecting the struggles to the genius. The sources mention his academic problems and their link to his dyslexia. It clearly affected his reading, his writing, in a conventional sense. He ended up getting kicked out of Liverpool College of Art before his final year.
So the very thing holding him back academically might have actually pushed him creatively.
Precisely. If structured reading and writing were hard, he leaned into other things. Sound, wordplay, visual humor. Think about that school magazine he made, The Daily Howl, full of nonsense, weird stories, those dark cartoons, even drawings of crippled people. It was rebellious, surreal. It's the seed of the writing that later got him critical acclaim.
And speaking of rebellion, the guitar story. 1956, Julia buys him his first guitar, that cheap Galatone Champion acoustic, and Aunt Mimi gives him that all-time classic line, pure gold in hindsight. The guitar's all very well, John, but you'll never make a living out of it.
Can you imagine hearing that just when you found your passion? But that guitar, it leads straight to the Quarrymen, his skiffle group, named after the school. And then destiny steps in. That crucial meeting, St. Peter's Church Garden Fete, July 6, 1957. He meets Paul McCartney.
And right away, you see the dynamic. Paul shows John chords he doesn't know a little glimpse of the partnership, but there's also tension. McCartney's dad apparently really disapproved of Lennon, said he'd get Paul into trouble.
Yeah, that early warning. It kind of foreshadows everything, the incredible connection, but also the eventual, implosion.
So we go from the Quarrymen, the skiffle group, into the early 60s. The band becomes the Beatles in 1960. But before global fame, there's Hamburg. That really forged them.
Oh, Hamburg wasn't Beatlemania. It was tough, grueling. Aunt Mimi was begging him to stick with art college, but he went. And they played these insane hours, sometimes 6, even 12 hours straight, overnight gigs.
And the stories about Preludin, the stimulant, are true. To keep going.
Yeah, the sources confirm it. They were young, playing in rough clubs, sometimes to sailors, sometimes just background noise. 12 hours on stage. Preludin was basically an amphetamine. Kept them awake, kept them edgy, energetic. It was common then just to survive the schedule. That whole experience, that trial by fire, it made them incredibly tight as performers. It was their boot camp.
And then Brian Epstein sees them, wants to manage them, polish them up, get them out of the leather jackets. Lennon, being Lennon, resisted the suits and the haircuts at first, but then
his pragmatism kicked in. That famous quote, "I'll wear a bloody balloon if somebody's going to pay me."
Yeah.
That's pure Lennon, isn't it? Cynical, but also, willing to play the game if the prize was big enough. And once Ringo joins, finalizing the lineup, it just explodes. Think about how fast it happened. Please, Please Me, the debut album, recorded in less than 10 hours in 63.
And you can physically hear the effort on that record, can't you? Lennon had a terrible cold recording.
Yeah.
Twist and shout. He said later he wasn't even singing. He was just screaming. But it became this iconic rock vocal, just pure raw power.
Absolutely. Born out of exhaustion. And even in those early pop songs, that sharp wit was already there. The Royal Variety Show, 1963, in front of the Queen Mother. For the people in the cheaper seats, clap your hands.
And the rest of you, if you'll just rattle your jewelry, classic.
It's hilarious, but it's also got that edge, hasn't it? A bit of class commentary aimed right at the establishment. Utter confidence. Then comes the U.S. invasion, Ed Sullivan in 64, and it's just nonstop touring, movies, madness for 2 years. But by 65, John started to feel trapped by it all.
You can hear it in the music. He said help was literally a cry for help. He talked about gaining weight, feeling lost. His fat Elvis period, he called it. He knew subconsciously he needed a change.
And change certainly arrived, partly through chemical means. That incident in March 65, he and George Harrison unknowingly get dosed with LSD by their dentist at a dinner party, spiked their coffee. Lennon talked about the intense confusion, thinking a nightclub lift was on fire. We were all screaming hot and hysterical.
Wow, that must have been terrifying, but also transformative.
It seems like it was. Coupled with his dissatisfaction with Beatlemania, it kind of primed him for what came next. The big controversy. 1966. The more popular than Jesus comment.
Ah, yes. He tells a reporter, Christianity will go. We're more popular than Jesus now. Maybe reflecting their UK status, but in the U.S.?
Oh, in the U.S., especially the South, it was explosive. Huge offense, record burnings, protests, even threats from the KKK. It got really serious.
That backlash must have been immense.
It was uncontrollable, and honestly, it was probably the biggest reason they decided to stop touring in August 66. For Lennon, the touring had become creatively draining anyway. This gave them the justification, albeit a pretty dramatic one, to get off the road. And that forces them into the studio full-time, which, of course, leads to their most experimental work.
Right. They become a studio band.
Yeah.
And you get things like Straw Peppers. The lyrics are suddenly so much deeper, more complex than the early stuff. Lennon himself thought Strawberry Fields Forever was maybe his best, most innovative song with the band.
And his political voice starts to emerge more clearly, too, not just hidden in jokes. It becomes more direct, and the counterculture immediately grabs onto it.
Yeah.
All You Need Is Love, performed live on our world satellite broadcast.
To what, 400 million people?
Something like that. Instantly becomes this global pacifist anthem.
And then Yoko Ono enters the picture. November 66, the Indica Gallery. Their first meeting is such a great story.
It really is. It captures both of them perfectly. He's intrigued by her conceptual art, especially hammer or nail. He wants to hammer a nail in before the show opens. The owner mentions Lennon's a millionaire, so Ono says, okay, but it'll cost 5 shillings. And Lenning's response is just Perfect fluxus. I'll give you an imaginary 5 shillings and hammer an imaginary nail in.
Brilliant. And that connection changes everything, doesn't it? Artistically, professionally, personally. He starts insisting she comes to the studio, which was a big no-no according to the band's unspoken rules about partners.
Yeah, that caused immediate friction. Big time. The other Beatles felt like their sanctuary, their workspace had been invaded. You can see the cracks really starting to show.
The end felt inevitable after that, maybe. But it was still messy.
Very messy. Lennon actually decides to leave in September 1969 after a big argument, but they all agreed to keep it quiet while contracts are sorted out. Then Paul McCartney announces his departure in April 1970, tied to his solo album release. And Lennon was absolutely furious, felt completely blindsided and betrayed.
He said he felt like a fool not to do what Paul did, which was use it to sell a record. Real bitterness there. He basically blamed Paul for taking over after Brian Epstein died, leading the band in a direction he didn't like, causing the collapse.
That bitterness, that complexity, it definitely bleeds straight into his first solo work.
Right after the Beatles, he dives into this intense self-examination. 1970, he and Yoko undergo primal therapy with Arthur Janoff. 6 months of it in London and LA.
Yeah, and understanding that therapy is key to the next phase. Primal therapy, the idea was that adult neuroses stem from repressed childhood pain, right? So Janov encouraged patients to basically relive those traumas, let it all out, often with screams, hence the primal scream.
And the music that came out of it?
Wow. John Lennon Plastic Ono Band in 1970. It's so raw, so stripped down, nothing like the Beatles sound. You've got Mother directly confronting his childhood feelings and working class hero.
Which got censored immediately, didn't it? For the line, "You're still fucking peasants." He wasn't holding back. It was vulnerability, but also pure rage.
But then, almost immediately, the pendulum swings again. 1971, Imagine. Much more polished, accessible, Phil Spector producing. The title track becomes this massive global anthem, his signature solo song, probably. It is. But even that song, as beautiful as it sounds, had lyrics that really provoked people, especially religious groups. When people challenged him on the no religion line, he gave that classic Lennon explanation. It wasn't about being anti-spirituality. It was about imagining a world with no denominations of religion, no my God is bigger than your God stuff.
Always twisting expectations. And meanwhile, the feud with McCartney is still simmering. Imagine also has How Do You Sleep on it, which is just a brutal takedown of Paul, responding to perceived digs on Paul's Ram album.
Oh, it's vicious. No punches pulled. Lennon did later say, maybe trying to soften it, that he was really writing about himself, but the initial intent, pretty clear it was aimed squarely at Paul.
And then he fully leans into politics. After meeting activist Tariq Ali, he puts out Power to the People, though he kind of disowned that one later, saying it came from guilt. His political actions were often quite theatrical.
Definitely theatrical, but often with real teeth, like returning his MBE medal in '69. And the reasons he gave were so specific. Britain's involvement in the Nigeria-Biafra War, supporting the U.S. in Vietnam, and then the kicker.
And against his single cold turkey slipping down the charts.
Exactly. Only Lennon could combine major geopolitical protest with a personal, slightly petty complaint about his record sales. It's brilliant, in a way.
His radicalism really peaked when he moved to New York in '71, and the Nixon administration did not like him being there.
No, they saw him as a genuine political threat. His anti-war stance was resonating, especially with young people who could vote for the first time in '72. So Nixon's team labeled his activities a strategic countermeasure, and they started this intense 4-year campaign to get him deported, using a minor 1968 cannabis conviction from the UK as the excuse. Senators Strom Thurmond actually suggested deportation would neutralize his influence. It was serious harassment.
A really tough legal fight. In March '73, he's actually ordered to leave the U.S. within 60 days. And his response with Yoko is just pure performance art protest. They announced the creation of Newtopia.
Classic Lennon and Ono. A conceptual country. No land, no boundaries, no passports, only people. The flag was just 2 white handkerchiefs. And the national anthem, which appeared on his Mind Games album, 3 seconds of silence. It was using absurdity to highlight the absurdity of the deportation attempt, questioning borders, questioning state power.
But while he's fighting this political battle, his personal life kind of implodes. The famous Lost Weekend, 18 months separated from Yoko.
Yeah, he later named it after that old film about alcoholism, which tells you something. It was a period of really heavy drinking, public messiness. He was mostly in L.A. and New York with May Pang, their personal assistant. And the peace activist image really took a battering. Those stories from the Troubadour Club in L.A. are pretty notorious.
Yeah, the sources mention them vividly. Sticking a sanitary napkin on his forehead, getting thrown out with Harry Nilsson for heckling the Smothers Brothers. It's hard to reconcile that with the guy singing Imagine, isn't it?
It is. That's the contradiction right there. He was clearly self-destructing, deeply unstable, but maybe it was also a howl of pain, a reaction against the pressures, the structures he felt trapped by. A very public breakdown.
Yet, amazingly, he was still making hits during this chaos. His only U.S. solo #1 single during his lifetime, Whatever Gets You Through the Night, came out then with Elton John, and he co-wrote Fame with David Bowie, gave Bowie his first U.S. #1. The talent was just undeniable even then.
The creativity never seemed to fully shut down, even in the darkness. But the Lost Weekend ended suddenly in early '75. He reunited with Ono. Apparently, Yoko told him she'd found a cure for his smoking habit, which is quite a line. May Pang said he seemed stupefied and confused when he went back.
And that reunion leads to another massive shift. Sean is born on John's 35th birthday, October 9th, 1975. And this triggers that 5-year hiatus. He steps away completely, becomes a house husband, famously says he's going to bake bread and raise the baby.
And by all accounts, he absolutely threw himself into it, documenting Sean's first year obsessively, photos, drawings. He said, he didn't come out of my belly, but by God, I made his bones. He attended to every meal, every detail. It seemed like an attempt to create the stable family life he never had himself.
A complete retreat from the world until 1980. That sailing trip to Bermuda seems to have reignited something.
Apparently, he took the helm during a storm, and it gave him this huge confidence boost. A sense of control back. He comes back, records a double fantasy, releases it in November 1980. The music reflects that stability, that contentment. Songs like, just like Starting Over, felt like a real comeback.
Before we get to the end, which is unavoidable, let's just pause on the other layers of Lennon. His writing, his art, outside of music, and those really complex relationships.
Right. His writing, you remember The Daily Howl? When his books in his own right and A Spaniard in the Works came out in the mid-'60s, they actually got really good reviews. Critics praised the wordplay, the fantasy.
Which is fascinating considering his dyslexia. He struggled with conventional writing, but critics loved his unconventional style. They called it remarkable, very funny. He succeeded by basically breaking the rules.
Exactly. And then there's the visual art, the conceptual stuff, heavily influenced by Yoko and the Fluxus movement. You know, Fluxus was all about anti-art, process over product, humorous simplicity.
And that led to things like the You Are Here exhibition in '68. That big white canvas with just the tiny words, "You are here," and releasing hundreds of white balloons. Pure concept.
And the experimental films they made, very provocative. Self-Portrait, the 40-minute shot of his penis in '69, or Erection, edited by the founder of Fluxus himself. These weren't about entertainment. They were about pushing boundaries, challenging what art could be. Defiance, again.
Okay, now the relationships. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Reconciling the icon with the man. Cynthia Lennon, his first wife. Their marriage kept secret initially for the band's image.
Yeah, and the sources, including Cynthia's own accounts, detailed his intense jealousy, his possessiveness. She recalled him hitting her once early on after seeing her dance with Stu Sutcliffe. She said he wasn't physically violent again, but remained verbally cutting and unkind. It forces you to ask, how does the Peace Campaigner square with that private behavior?
It's central to the contradiction, isn't it? The marriage ended when she came home from holiday and found him with Yoko, wearing bathrobes. Just devastating for her.
And then he tried to divorce her for adultery, which she denied. Eventually, it was settled, but it was messy.
And that leads to Julian, his first son, also kept somewhat secret at birth. Paul McCartney wrote Hey Jude for him during the divorce, trying to comfort him. Not John.
The contrast between how Julian's birth was handled and the intense focus on Sean's birth years later is really stark. Lennon explicitly called Sean a planned child, drawing a clear line.
He seemed to be trying to heal his own childhood wounds through Sean. But did he ever reconnect with Julian?
He was trying to, right before he died. In that final Playboy interview, he said, I don't love Julian any less. He belongs to me and he always will. He was planning to build a relationship with the then 17-year-old Julian. But tragically, Julian was largely left out of the will. That rift was never fully healed.
And his relationships with the other Beatles, always complicated, it seems. Friendly with Ringo.
Always loyal to Ringo, yeah. But with Paul and George, it was much more volatile. Love, rivalry, resentment. He was really annoyed by George Harrison's autobiography, I, Me, Mine, in 1980. Felt George barely mentioned his influence, remembered every minor musician but not him. That need for recognition was still there.
And with Paul, that rivalry never really stopped, did it? His assistant said during the house husband years, John was okay as long as Paul was putting out stuff John thought was mediocre. But then Paul released Coming Up in 1980, and Lennon apparently couldn't get the tune out of his head, joked, "It's driving me crackers."
Even in retirement, the competition was alive. But just days before he died, he did offer a kind of final summary. He said he'd only ever chosen to work closely with two people, Paul McCartney and Yoko Ono. That ain't bad fickin'. A sort of grudging, ultimate respect for the two key figures in his creative life.
Which brings us, sadly, to the end. Just weeks after Double Fantasy, that comeback album was released.
December 8th, 1980. Around 5 p.m., he signed a copy of the album from Mark David Chapman outside the Dakota building where he lived. He and Yoko went to a recording session. When they returned about 10:50 p.m., Chapman was waiting and shot him 4 times in the back. He was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, but pronounced dead around 11:15 p.m. He was only 40.
Just unbelievable. Ono's response was immediate and, well, very dignified. Asked for donations to his Spirit Foundation instead of flowers, requested a silent vigil. John loved and prayed for the human race. Please pray the same for him.
He was cremated, ashes scattered in Central Park, near where the Strawberry Fields Memorial now stands.
The assassination itself, awful as it was, sent his final music soaring up the charts. Just like starting over, and Double Fantasy went to #1 everywhere.
Yeah, and then Imagine and Woman also hit #1 in the UK in '81. His presence was just immense, even immediately after his death.
And the accolades kept coming long after. Grammy for Album of the Year for Double Fantasy, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, twice Beatles in solo, voted one of the greatest Britons.
His lyrics endure, too. Imagine voted the UK's favorite song lyric in '99. The memorials are everywhere. Liverpool, John Lennon Airport, peace monuments, even a crater on Mercury named after him. His impact is just undeniable.
He remains this towering, contradictory figure, maybe impossible to fully pin down, but perhaps, as some writers suggest, his greatest achievement was just offering those raw self-portraits in his songs, speaking about the human condition, flaws and all, always reaching for vulnerability, even through the anger or the cynicism.
Absolutely. We've traced him from that rebellious kid in Liverpool, through the drug-fueled creativity in the political firebrand phase, right up to the dedicated dad trying to find peace. He was constantly shedding skins, constantly searching for something authentic, even within the massive machine of fame.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. Looking at that whole journey, all those changes in style, politics, personal life, which John Lennon resonates most with you? Was it the sharp-tongued Beatle, the peace-preaching conceptual artist, the activist fighting the government, or the reclusive house husband who came back for one final act? Which phase do you think really captured the essence of John Winston Ono Lennon? Something to mull over.